Hi, I'm Bo Humphreys, and this is the Personal Finance Show. It is July 12th, 2020, the year of the pandemic. It's episode 16 of my COVID-19 series. I've done this for 16 weeks in a row, which, I mean, it seems like a lot of weeks, actually, but I had done 100 episodes of my podcast before that. Took a little break to be a stay-at-home dad, and then we got daycare, and I became a full-time insolvency counselor. Not a lot of time for podcasting during that time. So I was on a break and I was thinking, I'll come back when I'm ready. This pandemic kind of pushed me into it a little early because I wanted to connect with people that I know, people around the world, people who I don't get to see very much, who have different experiences and can talk about what it's like for them during this COVID-19 pandemic. And in this specific case, this week, my friends started a podcast. It just happened to be during the pandemic, though I believe maybe some recording was done beforehand. It was all released during this time. And I know at least one episode was done socially distanced. So today I have Brynn Bernie and Aaron Yeager, who are 2 out of 3 co-hosts of the podcast. That Was a Show. Did I say it right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bo.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so, I wanted to know about your COVID-19 experience and maybe how it's affected your personal finances or what way you went with, if you needed government support and, like that kind of thing. But also then we're going to talk about the podcast because I love it. It's probably my favorite things because I listen to personal finance shows all the time, right? And, there may or may not accidentally be some money stuff in your episodes, but it's not a personal finance show. It's about failed sitcoms specifically, right, from the 90s?
Failed or forgotten.
Failed or forgotten, yes.
Yeah.
Because I guess fail is a bit of a subjective term.
Yeah. I mean, there's one of the elements of our show is, like, obviously we wanted to not only talk about kind of funny failures of sitcoms from the 80s and 90s. We also wanted to talk about shows that no one talks about from that period. So that hence the forgotten. So they might have lasted longer and on paper been sort of somewhat successful, but it's just like no one remembers them and no one is like, oh, that was a show? Like,
yeah, that was the perfect title. Because I'm sure you could have done a whole show about Seinfeld and Friends. But that's probably been done already, right?
It's been done, and that would be the easy thing to do.
It's the easy thing to do.
The 80s and 90s, I kind of describe as peak sitcom. So it was a time, if you think of like an equivalent being the dot-com boom of the late 90s and early 2000s, where it almost feels like every idea had resources thrown at it, and just the vast number of sitcoms that were made during that time is almost hard to believe. So whenever someone asks us, are you ever going to run out of shows to talk about? Absolutely not. The more we research this, the more we just can't even keep up with how many sitcoms were made that lasted like 5 episodes or 17 episodes and no one remembers them.
That's incredible. You just had me thinking, I think I read a stat once that there's like so many less sitcoms now. Am I wrong, or is it all just Netflix shows now?
Well, I mean, there are sitcoms, there are half-an-hour comedies, but they're mainly called like half-an-hour comedies. And
yeah, is the sitcom still in existence? Like the format?
Yeah,
it is.
Definitely.
Depends how someone uses the word, though. Like capital S sitcom, some people think of as the 3-camera show shot in front of a live studio audience, like what we know of as a classical sitcom. And those shows were produced almost like a stage play with a limited number of sets and with a live audience. And you were speaking of shows like Seinfeld and Friends. One could argue that those were the shows that kind of foreshadowed the transition from that style into what most TV comedy does now, which is shot cinematically, single cam, no audience, kind of like the way that most dramas are produced.
So like 30 Rock, for example, would be an example of that. Yeah. And that seemed a little bit unprecedented, at the time, and then everything became that. Most Netflix shows. But just speaking of that, a sitcom is situation comedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's
so
correct.
just for anyone who doesn't know the term. I'm thinking of a couple that have been on Netflix, and I was surprised to either hear laugh tracks or perhaps even a live audience still. Do you know examples of any of those? There was one with Ashton Kutcher, I think.
Oh,
maybe not a live
the
audience,
ranch.
but
The ranch.
yeah, that one.
Yeah. That was not good.
Also, she's the encyclopedia between the two of us. So
Yeah.
when it comes to trying to remember some reference, she's the one who's probably going to remember it.
I remember you said that in one of the episodes that your other co-host Andrew, also known as Barry, and Brynn are the like absorbing the TV for their entire childhood. That's was more your thing, right, Brynn?
Yeah.
And Aaron, you were where maybe Brynn and Barry would have absorbed everything and watched everything that they could. You, I believe you said that you weren't necessarily interested in watching like every show that was out there.
I watched a lot of shows that were out there, but I would say that I maybe don't have the memory to retain
it's a memory
things.
thing. Okay.
If it's
Yeah.
something that I saw once,
Sure.
I probably don't have the memory to retain it. The reason I do have encyclopedic knowledge of Seinfeld, but that's because I've watched every episode 50 times, and I would equate that show to being more like my relationship with music, where it's like, no matter how many times I hear a Beatles song, I'm not going to get tired of hearing it again and again. And so it's a show that almost falls into that category, where my knowledge of it is something that is repetitive versus the kind of amazing memories that Brynn
I think
and Barry
I'm more
have.
like you. Yeah, I'm more like you. I have that of Friends because I watched them on repeat all the time when they were on syndication. And I never had exposure when they were actually on because I didn't have cable and such. But like I said, I could talk to you guys about all of these things the whole show and never even get into COVID or personal finance. But let's touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we'll get back and you can tell us about the podcast specifically and origin about that and in terms of the format, because I like all your little segments and stuff too, and I want to talk about those. So let's go back to say pre-pandemic, just pre, or where were you? You were working. You both are married. I think I don't know if we'd mentioned that
We're
yet.
married to each other.
Married to each other, yeah. In the house. So you're both recording in your home right now.
Yes.
And so whoever wants to go first.
So I guess just a little snapshot was, we were both working full time, and we were actually planning what was supposed to be our first anniversary trip / honeymoon, because we had put off our honeymoon. We got married in May of 2019, May 4th, 2019. And we're very busy. We work full time, and we have a lot of creative projects that we do together as creative partners. And we just didn't have any time to plan the honeymoon until about a year later. So we were, getting all of that wrapped up. We had this like epic Europe trip planned, and Aaron and I hadn't ever traveled together internationally and had barely even gone on a vacation together. So this was something
So it's a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal. We were pretty pumped up for it. And then obviously, February and March.
There was definitely a period where we had booked all of our flights.
Yeah.
And we were starting to book hotels and make all of the rest of the plans. And things started to
there
kind
were whispers.
Yeah. And there was a period in February and into early March where we were thinking, like, is this something that we should be really concerned about? Are we going to need to cancel our trip? And there was definitely that period of time where I think these things were kind of hazy to a lot of us here.
It was unclear. And then it got to be, I think it was coming into the second week of March where we were like, okay, like ethically, we shouldn't go on this trip. And then ultimately the decision was made for us that, we weren't going to be traveling internationally.
Yeah.
We had basically made that decision on a personal level. We're like, it's not right for us to go on a trip right now. And then it was like, okay, well, you're not going anyway.
Yeah, we made the decision ourselves, and then it was confirmed moments later when the government advised against all non-essential travel.
it makes that easier, right? Because I kind of jumped the gun about one day before the government made us all go home, and I was like, our company was like, if you want to work from home, you can do that, right?
Yeah.
And we're making arrangements, and I was like, yes, please, thank you, let's do that. And everyone's like, what's your rush? And then the next day it was made, right? So a lot of us are probably more ready to or more aware, like, hyper aware of these things.
Exactly.
And we all have different levels of anxiety and levels of just I don't know, tolerance of this kind of thing,
right.
or doing research. Did you have an experience like that?
I was definitely starting to research the situation pretty intensely, and having conversations with other people I worked with, talking about what's happening and whether it's... I remember having a lot of conversations with people where we were all being very tentative, but starting to feel our way through the level of concern that we should be experiencing. And then when things did start to become very serious... everything seemed to move so fast.
It escalated really quickly. Yeah. It all, and another element to mention, which is just like a very unfortunate coincidence, is that my mom has been dealing with a bit of a health crisis that is completely unrelated to COVID-19, but it's just like a really bad coincidence. She's fine now, I will say. Like she's like, her situation has stabilized.
Sure.
But she has been in some form of hospital ever since March.
Wow.
Yeah, and she went into hospital right around the same time when things were starting to lock down for reasons completely unrelated to COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
but made her situation more difficult.
Yeah. So we were dealing with like multiple, like a hat on top of a hat on top of a hat.
That's all we need is more stress when it's already a stressful situation. So you were thinking about your mom. Is she going to be okay?
My mom, and obviously we were very limited in like our interactions with her. Again, it was like that same week, like that second week of March, that we were coming to terms with the fact that our trip was canceled. Then my mom went into the hospital. Then ultimately I was laid off from where I was working. Okay. And I was like, okay, now I can like be available to my family. And then
like the silver lining, right?
Yeah, that's how I looked at it. But then it was becoming obvious that I wouldn't even be able to go visit her at all.
Of course.
And we were able to go in and visit her. She was transported from Windsor to London. We were able to visit her briefly in London before everything completely shut down. And basically it's been video chats and phone calls ever since. And yeah, I'm happy to report that situation has, like my mom is recovering and doing well. It's a bit of a life-altering situation, but she's doing, as well as could be expected.
That's good to hear.
So as all of this, it's just kind of been something we've been taking day by day. At one point, like obviously, I don't know, 2 weeks after that, the government ordered non-essential services be shut down.
Yeah, that was the point where I stopped working because the type of work I was doing was not an essential service, and that was definitely the responsible move on the part of the government. And so there was a time when both of us were on the CERB, the CERB program.
And just, Aaron, generally you work in the film industry.
Film and video and media production.
Yeah, right. And that's one of the industries that, I mean, you can there's some pivoting being done, but a lot of it is working with other people directly, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a very collaborative industry in general.
Absolutely.
And so among other industries that were heavily affected, it largely shut down as a result. And so being not an essential service, it's understandable. And so that caused us to both start really looking at the idea of a household budget, which
so
is something
you
we had
hadn't
never done before.
Okay, so you, I'm curious, it didn't come up at all, like as the wedding was approaching, or what about that situation?
Well, I mean, that whole period of, we had lived together for 2 years before we got married.
Yeah.
And, we were managing, like, there was some, like, it was a very day-to-day kind of situation because I wasn't back in school a couple years ago as well.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, our finances were, it's something, it was like a daily conversation, but like not a long-term conversation.
Okay.
It was like, how are we going to get through this month? How are we going to, we were just kind of.
So you're figuring it out, but you didn't have a real concrete reason to do it, thinking that you might run out of money like now, right?
Exactly.
Like on Serb.
And then when we found ourselves on a very specific
you have this
budget.
number.
Yeah, we had this number of like, we were able to really look at everything and look at our spending and see where we could really, obviously we love food.
Yep.
So we were spending a lot of money on food.
Food's probably one of our biggest hobbies.
Yeah.
Sure.
Like we were going out to eat because there's so many great restaurants in the area that we live in. Like
That's right.
we were getting takeout. We were going out to eat. We were, Aaron's like favorite grocery store was basically his place of worship. Like he would like go there and just casually stroll and like,
Well, actually, on the topic of groceries, this is a funny difference between the two of us, and I know a lot of people fall into one category or the other, but I love grocery shopping. I love food shopping.
And I find it really tedious.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's usually, there's probably a couple dynamic thing.
Yeah.
I like eating the food. I just don't like buying the food,
So I was in the habit of just buying groceries on a day-to-day basis, piecemeal, little bits at a time. Partly because I actually enjoyed doing it. So I saw it more as like
a fun thing,
just a day-to-day fun thing to do, not something that you plan. And planning it almost takes the fun out of it. So
it does a lot.
I don't know that I'd ever really gone to a grocery store with a shopping list before.
It was your luxury, right? It was partially your luxury, but also buying things that you needed to eat to live.
Yeah.
So you're able to combine those two things. And not everyone, I mean, you should have the freedom to do that if that's in your budget, which it may very well be, especially when you're both back to work, right?
Well, so what happened is that we would then sit down and make an actual shopping list and say we are, for the purposes of being responsible with the physical distancing thing, trying to do one grocery shopping trip every 2 weeks approximately. And between the infrequency of it and not eating out, suddenly I'm realizing actually how big of a grocery shop I would need to do for 2 to 3 weeks worth of food, 3 meals a day.
And it was eye opening because we were actually like looking at the numbers. We were looking at
how much we spend on food.
Yeah, just like it's just, and like coffees and
So have you like now changed your habits because of this, or is it just something that you're realizing that you're determining whether you do need to work on it, or are you accepting it as it's a big part of our life and this is how much we spend on food and that's okay? What are you settling on there?
I think there's somewhere in the middle, like because a big realization is that we were, for our situation, we were living a bit beyond our means. And this was our opportunity to look at it and be like, okay, like we should reevaluate how we're spending and, kind of work within a budget, like transport the budget that we were on while both on Serb and bring it into quote unquote normal life whenever that is fully normal.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
And there's a balance, right? We want to be happy. We want to, do the things that make us happy, which is indulge in good food and healthy food.
Striking that balance between enjoying the day-to-day and planning for the future is is a tricky one.
Yeah.
These are conversations I have every day with insolvency clients. It's just interesting that you can get the same effect by going through this kind of income reduction in a pandemic.
Yeah.
I don't want people to have to become completely insolvent to have these realizations you're having. So this is very inspiring to hear.
We are fortunate that we were able to take a step back and look at everything. And another thing we sort of realized as a family is we weren't planning enough for emergencies. And that's something we want to work toward, is to have more of a cushion put aside. Like, not that we want this to happen again, but
no, but it makes you think, right?
It really does. It really does.
Yeah, and one other thing I would say about CERB is we are in the privileged position of being a couple who live together.
Double
and
CERB.
So that means that we are able to support each other and share most of our expenses. And although we were able to make it work, I would imagine that for a lot of people who are living alone in a big city where the cost of living is relatively high, like a Toronto or a Vancouver, then it would be a very tight, very stressful situation.
If you have 4 children and are a single parent, you don't get more than $2,000.
I can't imagine.
They didn't make a difference. Now, you get your child tax, but you were getting that already, right? So whatever you were doing to work to make $2,000, or probably more, now you're only getting 2, and that's not a net of tax, right? Save your taxes, by the way, for the CERB.
Oh yeah, on top of it. I already have a little stash.
So yeah, you are fortunate to have a double CERB family, and just in this specific case, you don't have any dependents at the moment, right?
No,
Other
just our freeloading cat,
baby Gizmo. Yeah.
So
you're, we should acknowledge that it is in relatively a privileged position to be in. Maybe you even had a little bit of savings as a buffer just in case.
Yes. So, and I think it is important to acknowledge the relative privilege that we've managed to come into this situation with.
Like, I think our stress has, for the most part, been more like anxiety about the state of the world and
COVID, not money.
And the personal dynamics in our families with, like my mom being in the hospital, like that's been like the bigger stress, and just feeling like, so many elements are somewhat out of our control.
So many unknowns.
Yeah, so much uncertainty, so much is out of our control. It was good to have a couple of things that were within our control, which was, of course, managing this day-to-day budget, at our family budget, and then of course like all of the personal, like the professional and creative development that we did, that was self-directed, and that includes our podcast. So
exactly, right? So and I want to get to that in one sec. I just want to acknowledge that this is a great thing to be able to take away from this. Yeah. And it's, like I said, it's what people go through when they go through insolvency. It's like, learn how to live at your most basic, but then you don't change that when your lifestyle inflates again.
Exactly. Yeah. That's kind of our plan as well.
Yeah. Fantastic. And then you're probably thinking about goals like your emergency fund, as you said, and whatever you might be thinking about more goals for the future in terms of what is money for, right? Other than just the day to day. And this is really, really good stuff. But yes, and out of all of this, this podcast is the source of levity and a good distraction. We all need these kinds of things. Whereas one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you both on the show is because this is such an entertaining show for me. I grew up in the 90s as well. Did I see any of these shows yet? No, I don't think so. Wasn't even aware. I think Aaron, did you say you weren't aware of Townies existing at the time?
I was not. I don't think I was aware of any of these shows that we've done so far. Although Townies, when we started talking about that show, it was the first of the episodes we've done where I thought, had I known this existed at the time, it does seem like something I probably would have watched.
Yeah.
Because it's similar to other shows that I did gravitate toward at the time.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, unfortunately, I knew of most of the shows.
well, you each picked some of these shows, right? Yourselves, right? Which ones did you pick, Brynn?
So my first pick was Teen Angel,
Okay.
and Townies was my second pick because I remembered Townies and I watched Townies like at the time, and really, I remember enjoying it, and I just wondered whatever happened with that show, and then
and that's what a lot of these shows are about, right? It's like, did anything happen to them? And you have a segment in the show in terms of the success stories, right, from whoever made it through. Townies is a big one. So Townies is like the blue collar friends, right?
Well, that's what they were trying to do.
Okay.
And you mentioned that you're a big fan of Friends, and it's a show that weaves its way through our discussions a lot.
Yes, it does. 6 Degrees of Friends, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't something we set out to do at the very start, to keep referencing Friends, other than the 6 Degrees of Friends, which, Brynn, would you like to? This is a segment that she does.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I kind of noticed in, I kind of go down a lot of IMDb rabbit holes.
Yeah.
So, if a show, basically how we present it in our podcast is that if it's a show that was produced within, a certain amount of time of Friends, like if it's within 20 years of Friends, there's going to be multiple connections.
Yeah,
and it's a whole play on that 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon theory, but it's 6 degrees of Friends, and we've been able to connect it well within 6 degrees every time.
Yeah, not even
so
getting
far.
the 6, right?
Yeah, it's usually one or two.
Like at the most, it's like 3.
Yeah.
So it's quite amusing that way, and we have a couple of upcoming episodes that are going to be released fairly soon that have some interesting connections.
Well, so Townies, like you mentioned, is sort of comes across as the blue collar Friends in a small fishing village outside Boston.
Yes. The Gloucester, right?
Gloucester. I had trouble pronouncing that.
Gloucester, Mass.
Yeah.
You do the accent better than we could. The next episode that we're releasing in the coming few days is about a show called Muddling Through. This is one of my picks. And
Muddling Through.
Yeah. And it also has a more direct connection to Friends that I'll just tease a little bit, which is that
if you can.
It was produced like 10 minutes before the first season of Friends. So Jennifer Aniston co-stars in this show.
Really?
And she contractually committed to it before Friends. So they shot the first run of episodes of Muddling Through. They shot the first half season of Friends, the first half of season 1 of Friends, and had Muddling Through been picked up to be renewed, she would have been contractually obligated to leave Friends, do Muddling Through, and they would have had to recast Rachel Green on Friends.
My God.
So there's a parallel universe, presumably, somewhere where that transpired. And in the episode, we talk a bit about what has come out in the last couple years about how that all played out. And
so we have background on that.
Yeah, some background on that, which is kind of fun.
It's a conspiracy.
It reminds me of what you said. I think it was Al Jean, who was a showrunner for one of he was on The Simpsons, right? Did I get the name right?
Yeah, Al Jean went from The Simpsons to...
was it Whoops?
It was Teen Angel.
Teen Angel.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And the guy left The Simpsons, at the height of it or just
as it was becoming huge.
Yeah. And then went and did that stinker Teen Angel.
And then went back to, they took him back at The Simpsons.
Yeah, they took him back.
Yeah.
It's like, I guess you want to, did you talk about why that might have been that he would have done that? Just to get more creative control or something? Or why would somebody do that in general?
It's any writer wants to do their own thing,
Okay, yeah, sure.
I can speak to that as a screenwriter. Like,
Yeah.
If I were working on someone else's TV show, naturally, if I had an opportunity to make my own TV show, I would jump all over that.
Okay.
But
and you don't know
like,
that it's going to be a bomb like
exactly,
Teen Angel.
Exactly. And the thing we see so often, it happens now still too, but back then especially, there was so much interference with like the powers that be, where the show just gets kind of whittled away, or it was a problematic premise to begin with, but it like there's so many elements that come into play in making a TV show that you have all these great intentions going into it, and like you have all these great ideas, but then how they're executed really depends on a lot of other people and a lot of other elements that are out of your control.
So many factors. One thing that we're noticing with a lot of the shows that we're talking about is that the show might seem like a failure, and there might be something about it that just feels like it doesn't work. But usually there are also some elements that seem like it has something going for it. Like often the cast is pretty solid.
Yeah,
often
it's usually great, really talented
great
performers
actors
in all of these shows.
And often the showrunners or the creators have a track record of having done at least one extremely successful show before. So
of course.
Or after.
And our very first episode, Aliens in the Family, you have the Jim Henson Company, you have the creators of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Yeah, that surprised me. The Fresh Prince creators, but you can't make magic every time, right?
No, exactly.
Yeah.
You can't make magic every time, and when there's too many hands in the pot, it really makes things weird and complicated. Like what we see a lot is like the Teen Angel example is a funny one, because it seems like the type of show that should have been more edgy.
Okay.
But the tone is weird because it was like made for a TGIF audience, like for a family audience.
And Whoops would have been the same sort of situation, right? Where you both of you talk about how they just could have done it just a little bit differently for any of these shows, and they just. But like Whoops is a good example of the apocalypse happens and they're all the second episode was about repopulating, right?
Yeah. Whoops was my first pick, and it's so high concept, and we kept talking about how a show like this could be made today on, let's say, Netflix or HBO. And it would be done in a very different style. It would be shot differently. It'd be written differently. And it could explore these big, weighty existential themes in a way that could actually be really entertaining. But this was basically like Cheers in a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
Sure.
So it's just 6 people hanging out in a house delivering the sort of hammy one-liners that you would expect of a very typical multicam sitcom of the time. So the style of the show, the actual execution, never really rises to the challenge of the concept.
Yeah, it's true. It's like the world wasn't ready for that kind of show yet, so they made it in a really weird sitcom, like 90s sitcom vacuum or something.
And my temptation is to say, well, that was how everything was at the time. But then there were the successful ones. Like Cheers is a successful example of that, where there was, everything was one. I mean, Carla and Woody dynamic, right? Like a lot of it could be considered a little bit lowbrow or campy or whatever now. But it's like these shows that you're talking about took it even to like the furthest depths of this.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, it's kind of like after the movie Die Hard was made, everyone kept pitching action movies that were like, this is Die Hard on a boat. This is Die Hard on an airplane. This is Die Hard in a, whatever the location may be. And Cheers was such a breakthrough successful sitcom that in a way transitioned us from the 80s into the 90s. And I think a lot of shows during and after were pitched as, this is Cheers in a, so Cheers was in a bar, this is Cheers in a school, this is Cheers in a restaurant, this is Cheers in a, and it does feel like a lot of those tropes would then get recycled, whereas Cheers was successful in part because people do hang out in a bar and chit chat. It is a location where that truly does make sense. And to take that same character dynamic and that same style of humor and just apply it to any setting isn't necessarily going to work.
Yeah. And like, so to use Townies as an example, all-star cast, Molly Ringwald, Jenna Elfman, and Lauren Graham, who Lauren Graham went on to do 10 seasons of Gilmore Girls, right?
And Gilmore herself.
Yeah, right, exactly. And she that is considered to be a comedy, even though it's not a sitcom, right? It's a comedy that is a drama comedy. Is it dramedy? Is that the best term for that show?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like dramedy is kind of a made-up thing, but
but how would you classify? It's not a sitcom, definitely, and was it an hour long?
It is. It's an hour. It's an hour-long drama.
But it was funny.
Yeah.
Like, in some ways, I guess. Like the character herself was funny, and then we have Sookie, who I can't remember the actor's name right now, but she's hilarious. Melissa McCarthy, right?
Yeah.
So Melissa McCarthy goes on to do a million comedies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that the success stories that you talk about when you talk about these shows is these people have made gold or will make gold, and then they're just trapped in this. I want to call it purgatory.
Yeah.
of a horrible show, right? And they're just like waiting for it to finish, or like.
And that's very true with Townies with Jenna Elfman, because immediately after she was Dharma. Like
Dharma and Greg.
She got the Dharma and Greg deal like basically halfway through the season when they knew it was going to be canceled. She had gotten her deal to be
immediately.
Yeah, so she was just kind of like biding her time.
And is it the same thing for Aniston and the one you're about to go through, or without more spoilers?
No, that's a little different. But we're gonna, we're going to.
You'll get into that.
Yeah, you
have to listen to the episode to find out.
Yeah.
But I will say that I believe Jennifer Aniston was involved in 4 other sitcoms before Friends took off.
Yeah, and they were all like not successful shows.
Yeah, but one thing we do talk about is that her raw talent is immediately evident from the first minute she's on screen.
Sure.
And I think that's a case with Jenna Elfman, with Jennifer Aniston, that you can see within their first line of dialogue why someone wants to put them in a starring role in a sitcom. They are very talented, and
there's some charisma there. Yeah, right.
Immediate charisma, and sitcoms are such a performer and actor-driven medium, especially back then when it was a multicam sitcom and often created at least in conjunction with people from the stand-up comedy world. So it's such almost like a stage performer medium and such an actor-driven medium that where this is very different from, let's say, talking about failed B movies, where there aren't any elements to grasp onto as why someone would have made this or why you would love this movie. Sitcoms were almost like this community of really talented performers who would bounce from show idea to show idea. And so they got to keep working, right? Like that the Aniston example of she had all these deals lined up or all these things that she tried. One of them's gonna hit. Yeah. I guess Courtney Cox was in a Bruce Springsteen video or something like that.
Oh yeah, she's pulled on stage, but it wasn't like really a spontaneous pull on stage. Obviously, she was cast in that video, and it was a whole thing. But yeah, she danced. It's the what video is that? Is that the?
Not Glory Days? No.
No, it was oh gosh.
Usually
Dancing in the Dark.
Dancing in the Dark.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like, because I feel like now I want to show from the three of you, which is how is a sitcom successful now, but I feel like you're talking about that as you're talking about the unsuccessful ones. You're referencing Friends, for example, and Seinfeld, what made them successful. So you're going to kind of cover all of that as you go. But like every one of those cast members, either exposure from modeling. I'm guessing, I think Matt LeBlanc maybe, or somebody had exposure from modeling. It's like they all have something. They're working their ass off, right?
Well, yeah. And Lisa Kudrow was originally in Frasier. She was Roz. She was the original Roz in Frasier.
What? Okay.
And she was let go and replaced by Perry Gilpin, it's Gilpin.
Yeah, Perry Gilpin, yeah.
Yeah. So she
was
like
she didn't even make it to pilot, or there was a pilot?
I think she didn't. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they shot a pilot with her in it, but I know that she was replaced, and she thought that was like the end of her career. And she thought, like, I'm never going to make anything of myself. And then she was cast as Phoebe in Friends, like, shortly after.
And when did Mad About You, when was her character in that? Was that previous to Frasier thing? I forget when Mad About You was around.
Yeah, I think Mad About You is... I'm not sure.
Because that's a really interesting crossover to me, too,
yeah, that is
right?
a fun crossover, because her character in Mad About You is Ursula Buffet, who's Phoebe Buffet's sister.
Twin sister. And in my mind, she still exists in the Mad About You world.
Yeah, well, Mad
About You... Which is very fun for me to think about.
Was well,
right?
was well before Friends, so... Yeah. I'm not sure where, like, she might have already been in Mad About You when Frasier became a thing.
It's almost like a comic book universe where you have these characters weaving between
that's
different
it, right?
stories.
The NBC comedies of the late 80s and early
so
90s.
This is our segment that Brynn leads that's kind of on this topic we call the spin-off.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I've been finding fascinating as we've been researching this, because we also, again, like, we enjoy watching, let's say, a bad movie and trying to, see why it doesn't work or laughing at that. But sitcoms are such a unique beast in the sense that we are getting to see all of these connections and seeing the talent of a lot of the performers who try sometimes desperately to make these shows work. And you mentioned Frasier, and of course it's well known as being the most, or one of the most successful spin-offs.
Yeah, Kelsey Grammer. Yeah.
And this is our next run of a few episodes, because we kind of accidentally fell into a rhythm where every few episodes are loosely connected with some sort of theme or style element. So our first 3 episodes are very high concept shows.
Yes.
Then we do a few in a row that are much more like the low concept hangout shows that are ultimately what most of the popular sitcoms of the 90s and 80s were like, such as Townies, or the one that we talked about earlier, Muddling Through. Yeah. And we're about to start recording some episodes about failed spin-offs.
Okay.
And
any spoilers there? Any titles?
We could probably give a title.
Yeah, like later today, we're actually recording an episode on Joni Loves Chachi.
Okay, wow, which was a spin-off of Happy Days,
of
yeah?
Happy Days, yeah.
Everyone's heard the term Joni Loves Chachi.
Yes.
But very few have seen this show.
Yeah, well, was Charles in Charge another
spin-off?
Yeah,
Scott
Yeah,
Baio.
That's the one that I would be more aware of.
Yeah.
And actually, that was a success?
That's a successful show.
Yeah, so you don't, like, for example, I was thinking about Aliens in the Family. Alf was a successful version of an alien in a family, or not successful?
Well, it wasn't
Alf.
a spin-off, but it was
not a spin-off.
It was a relatively successful similar type
it ran
of show
for like a few seasons.
Yeah.
And
So
was huge in the pop culture, like, zeitgeist. Like, it was like
huge. Right? Alf. Everybody knows Alf. Nobody knows what's the baby's name in the Aliens in the Family?
Boba. Nobody remembers Boba.
And of course, there was that show Dinosaurs,
which was successful. Yeah.
Well, it didn't last long, but it's generally
had such a huge
impact. It had an impact,
especially on people in our age group.
Yeah,
not
a bit
of
a cult following to that one. So it's almost like Freaks and Geeks, where even though it didn't last a long time, it had an outsized impact.
Yeah.
Whereas Aliens in the Family did not.
And so that's the ones you're going to talk about, and you're probably going to end up always finding ones that I've never heard of, because that's the point, right?
That's the point. Yeah. it's a fun surprise for people, and it creates a conversation. We want people to go out and, like, start Googling these shows and trying to find old clips, and, like, because it's just, it's just a fun little rabbit hole you can go down.
There's one I'm curious about. Herman's Head, is that on your list? Or was that
has
successful?
Come up in discussion.
Like we've been floating that around. I think that falls more in the forgotten category, because I think it was somewhat successful.
Well, it had Yardley Smith, right?
Yeah.
Who plays Lisa Simpson.
Yeah. So we have to. That's one we're kind of we've thrown out there as something to potentially cover.
You have to have enough bad material in it for you to be able to do a show, right? So if it was just like meh, then maybe it doesn't meet the criteria.
Yeah. Well, and we really want to find a lost gem in all of this.
Sure. Please.
We haven't been successful yet, but we are really hoping to discover that one of these shows is actually really good.
We'd love to watch a show that lasted 5 episodes where we're just blown away by it and thinking it was a crime to take this off the air.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what we like our goal. Like we would really love to find that show that just no one remembers, but unfortunately it's not happened yet. But
so before we go, how do you find these shows? Like, where do you watch them?
Well,
like YouTube or are some of them on YouTube?
Yeah, if you do a search, I mean, these shows are out in the ether. And
they're in the world. You'll find them.
Yeah. So I would say, it's kind of, we leave it a bit up to the listener to do their own treasure hunt.
Yeah.
Because you may have, there may be a subscription or something you have to sign off on, and not everybody has access to everything. And maybe you can find some of them on YouTube or an example of it anyway, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a trailer or something. So it just, I just wonder, like, they have these TV stations, TV Land or whatever for some of the older shows for those who have cable. But I'm sure there's a lot of places to get them, but it's just random research, right? You just just Google.
One thing we're hoping for is to eventually come upon a show where the only way to watch it is like a VHS tape at a library or that we buy on eBay.
Seriously, right? It's and because I mean you've all seen or heard of these shows, or how do you find the idea in the first place? Like is it something you saw when you were a kid? I know Teen Angel was one of those. Is that right, Brynn?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is, I guess it's just like myself and our other host, Barry, just being way too invested in television.
Just having this list of
pop
bad
culture,
shows.
and just like having this like running list of, remember that show? Yeah.
Well, that's why you came up with this show in the first place,
exactly.
right? I mean, otherwise you wouldn't have been able. Is that basically the origin? Is that you would talk about whatever happened in this show?
Yeah, and like we for a long time wanted to do a podcast because it is such a great medium. It is such a,
accessible democratic medium.
Yeah, and we listen to a lot of podcasts, and we have like lots of fun conversations about pop culture, and we're like, let's just put these things together, especially during COVID times, it's become very easy to like connect with people through the podcast and to actually create something and put something out in the world without, leaving the house and without, so, we always wanted to do a podcast, and, I was like, what can it be about? What can we really dive into? And I'm like, what comes naturally to me? Talking.
We talk a lot about television.
Talking about popular culture. That's just what comes naturally. And I think it all started when I like slipped a list to Barry one day, and I was like, what do all these shows have in common? Like,
nice.
Like just like, and he like, laugh at the list because he's like, oh yeah, haha, and then it's like, yeah, they're all like canceled shows. Like, let's do a
podcast about that.
About it.
And
I
then
love it.
I come at it from a slightly different direction because whereas they have this encyclopedic knowledge and memory, I come from a documentary film background.
Yes.
And so I'm used to researching a lot. And So the shows that I've proposed have usually come through some form of me taking a deep dive into research, and I wouldn't say there's any one way, but sometimes there will be an article that was published a decade ago where someone said these are the top 20 worst shows of whatever time period, or here's something that you've forgotten ever existed. And then sometimes it'll be a connection from one to another, or thinking about, okay, we've done several episodes about shows in the 90s. I'd love to jump back into the 80s now. And, you know, somehow the idea of spin-offs was floated. So starting to think about failed spin-offs from the 80s, and, you know, that eventually landed on a show like Joni Loves Chachi. So
it's perfect, right? And I can tell the research that is being done, and I do want to mention the editing is fantastic. Using the laugh track as the break between segments, or just to cut somebody off who maybe didn't land 100% on or said something funny but not funny. I love it. It really works for me, and I think these are the little touches that people don't realize. It takes a lot of work to put this kind of thing together. Being a podcaster who doesn't edit anymore, I know how long it takes to edit things, right? People can find your show by typing in "that was a show," where they found this show. That's pretty clear. I'm going to put a link to it, of course, in there. You're going through Anchor for now. That's
hosting on Anchor, and it's definitely available on
across
all the major.
Like I use Podcast Addict app, for example. They pull it from the iTunes database, and which Apple Podcasts. So most things, once if you publish through Anchor to Apple Podcasts, then it populates everything else, and Google as well, and all that kind of stuff. So just go where you look for podcasts. Actually, search on the internet. You could probably find it. I think I did.
For sure.
And you have is there a contest running still right now?
Yeah.
We do, from now until the end of July 31st.
Okay, great. So there's still time, because this is publishing today, right?
Yeah.
On July 12th.
Well, there's two ways to enter it. I won't go into all the details now, but I'll say that if you follow our show on Instagram, there's some info. And if you listen to the latest couple of episodes, we talk about it too.
Yeah.
Great. So, just go and listen to the show. That's the idea, right? You're not going to be able to enter the contest if you don't listen to an episode, at least. That's but if you maybe just to follow on Instagram, I should shout out to Brynn Walker, who did your art, and who would be the one, the T-shirts that are part of the contest, right?
Yeah.
His art is on there.
Our amazing friend Brynn Walker, he's a very talented artist. He created our cover art for our amazing cover art for
awesome.
the podcast, and we're hoping to collaborate with him on more stuff related to the podcast. So he created this great cover art, which is featured on T-shirts that we have available, and are part of our contest.
And it's heavily inspired by 80s and 90s movie and TV posters.
I can see that. The neon colors, right?
Yeah.
The pink, I think
fun.
Neon pink is just bright pink. Yeah, I remember that. I think I had a Varney shirt or something like that that had all those colors on it. So that's awesome. Is there so you've talked a little bit about the next show coming up. Is there a specific plan, or is it just whenever it hits you and whenever all of you have time to even get together, pandemic-wise? What's the future look like?
We're trying to be fairly consistent. So we're trying to release an episode every 2 weeks.
Perfect.
Typically on a Tuesday every other week.
Okay.
And we record them a little bit of a ways in advance of release.
Of course.
Largely to give lots of editing time and also to buffer for our day-to-day schedules. So, for instance, the episode that we record today, I would imagine will come out in about a month or something like that.
Yeah. So you're a couple episodes ahead.
Yeah.
But you do have the muddling through coming out on Tuesday?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So anybody who listens to that today can go and subscribe to That Was a Show, and then you'll get the next episode when it comes up. But listen to the first 4 or 5. Well, 4
so
plus
There's 4
plus an
episodes,
intro.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did the good podcasting thing and did an intro episode, right?
Little trailer,
it's in the podcasting handbook for sure.
Yeah.
I did not do that because I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
My first show, it starts with, so you're Chris Chan? That's the first line from my first show. But that was a long time ago, and I decided to not change any of it because I wanted to see where I came from. And it was just me putting down a phone in the middle of the table and having an interview with Chris Chan.
I like it.
And that's it, right? And it's good to know where you came from. And you of course have a fantastic format from the beginning, being especially professional film person and video and editing, and both Brynn and Barry having written screenplays, correct?
Yeah.
Both of you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and lots of experience, of course, watching television and knowing about all of this
Too
stuff
much
too.
experience.
Too much. So it's like all of this combined just gives the three of you have very interesting, different perspectives. Some you agree on some things, but you have different points of view, and so the play is really good, and I like that. Having 3 hosts is not necessarily common.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is actually filling a bit of a gap where either you have a lot of solo podcasters or co-hosts.
Mm-hmm.
Having 3 just kind of keeps it fresh at all times.
Yeah.
You never like, oh, I can't, I don't want to listen to that person say the same thing over and over again. Not that I would ever get tired of hearing the 3 of you speak.
Thanks.
So I'm so glad that we were able to do this crossover episode, if you will.
Thank you.
And we talked a little bit about personal finance, but it's also good to just talk about other podcasts too. Podcasts should promote other podcasts, especially ones that aren't in the same genre, right? Because you may have people listening who are interested in looking for a show. Like I see posts all the time, like, "Hey, give me more true crime podcasts," or like, "Now I'm tired of the true crime stuff. Can you give me something else?" Right? There's lots of podcast groups out there, and a lot of people working on that stuff, trying to figure out what the next a gem is. And so I'm happy to help you get a couple of more listeners, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much.
All right. So next week, I have no idea who my guest is. Still working on that. That's the thing about doing a no planned schedule, is maybe I'll have a guest, maybe it'll just be me. We'll find out, but I'm definitely going to do something next week and keep talking about COVID and keep keeping in touch with everybody. So I'll see you next week.